My name is Grace Keller-Long, and I'm from St. Paul, Minnesota. According to Yann Martel, the author of The Life of Pi, the world isn't just the way it is. It is how we understand it, no? And in understanding something, we bring something to it, no? Doesn't that make life a story? The first big story that I told myself began when I was around 9 or 10. That's when my family decided to watch the movie WALL-E. When I saw the futuristic vision of Earth covered in garbage and no longer fit for human habitation, I freaked out. I ran up to my room, crying. From that moment on, I became obsessed with fighting climate change, or global warming, as I called it. I became somewhat obnoxious about the usage of energy in my home, turning off lights and appliances that I deemed unnecessary. I had bake sales with my friends to raise money to buy acres of rainforest, and I accumulated a small library of books about fighting global warming for kids, like the kids' version of Al Gore's An Inconvenient Truth, given to me by my family members, who are happy to feel my passion. My story of the world was one of despair, but it was also one of hope. I firmly believed that climate change was a serious problem, but I also believed that I was the one who was going to fix it all. But when I was around 12 or 13, something changed. I gradually became disillusioned with the whole idea of creating change. Who was I to think that I could make a difference in the world? Would all of this effort ever actually account for something? I gradually pushed the whole idea out of my mind. The battle against climate change seemed like one that I was doomed to fail, which was why it made sense not to work on it anymore. I was just setting myself up for disappointment. This was a sort of precursor to my new perfectionistic mentality that accompanied my transition into middle school. I became terrified of not measuring up to my self-imposed standards. I was also scared of failure and how others would view me after witnessing my failure. I always felt that in the eyes of my peers, as well as my own, I had to be perfect, or if I were going to mess up, I was to do so in an artful, self-deprecating fashion. I didn't realize quite what a perfectionist I was until I came here to CSG. In leadership class, we learned about a variety of different ideas that were all applicable to our lives. The three that stuck with me most are all interconnected, and they are vulnerability, challenge, and of course, perfectionism. When you're a perfectionist, you're afraid of challenge because you view it as an opportunity for failure. You don't want to be vulnerable because vulnerability means exposing the not-so-perfect parts of what makes up a person. Finally, challenge means allowing yourself to be vulnerable to failure. The more I learned about these multifaceted ideas, the more I began to see myself in them. I was a perfectionist. I was, as I wrote in my first Chronicle entry, terrified of challenge. I didn't want to expose myself to the vulnerability of failure in any way. But even though I had identified this part of myself, I was having a hard time getting rid of it, or even toning it down. Catherine M. Valente is one of my favorite authors, and there's a quote from her that has stuck with me for a few months now. It goes, "Clothes are a story you choose to tell about yourself, a different one every day." A story you choose to tell about yourself. And then there's a similar quote from Jacqueline Woodson, another favorite author of mine. "When there are many worlds, you choose the one you walk into each day." Stories. Choice. Even through all the learning I had done at CSG, this was the piece I had been missing. What story was I telling myself? What world was I choosing to walk in? It was a world where nothing but perfection was acceptable. Once I realized that the story that I told myself became my truth, I saw that by changing my story, my words could change the world. While I was in the process of revising the story that I told myself about my abilities, I also started to think about my story of the world. I realized that while no one person is going to be a superhero that saves the world from every injustice it faces, that is no reason to do nothing at all. So I decided that my story of the world would need some revising as well, and that is what I've been working on throughout my time at CSG. Every day, some class or experience would change some part of the story from grim to hopeful. I realized that an individual's actions, as small as they may seem, make a big impact. With my new story of the world, there was no reason why I shouldn't try my hardest to make a positive change. My new story of the world emphasizes interconnectedness, and this is especially apparent when considering the ocean. During the beginning of my semester at CSG, I struggled with how to apply my new awareness of the health of the ocean to my life back home in Minnesota. But in an interconnected world, everything impacts the ocean, even my life in St. Paul, which is directly connected to the ocean through the Mississippi River. The health of the river impacts the health of the ocean, which determines the health of the entire world. This realization is somewhat a cause for alarm, because nitrogen pollution from Midwestern agriculture has created a dead zone the size of New Jersey in the Gulf of Mexico. This is really scary. The fact that the actions of people who are practically in my backyard can impact the ocean over 1,000 miles away is scary. Interconnectivity is scary. But according to my new view of the world and my new view of myself, just because one person can't completely solve this problem, it doesn't mean that there is nothing they can do at all. The Talmud says, "We see the world not as it is, but as we are." And I think that through the process of transforming myself, I have also transformed the world. Thank you.